Yes.
I mean, I wrote a book about Operation Paperclip, and my God, talk about a rabbit's hole.
That's a rabbit hole.
It's a rabbit hole.
Let's explain to people that don't know what we're talking about. Operation Paperclip was when, after World War II, the United States gathered up a ton of scientists from Nazi Germany, brought them over to America, and even Werner von Braun. They had Werner von Braun run NASA. He was a Nazi, like 100% Nazi.
Good friends with Hitler type Nazi.
Yes, he ran a Berlin rocket factory where they hung the 5 slowest Jews. They would hang them out front so everybody would know, like, this is what happens when you work slow. We'll hang you. I mean, the Simon Wiesenthal Center said that if Werner von Braun was alive today, they would prosecute him for crimes against humanity.
Yes, they would.
And that was the head of NASA. That was the head of NASA. That was the guy who got us to the moon. That was the big cheese guy. Yeah. So we were willing to put a lot of really dark things aside in order to gather up the best scientists so that the Soviet Union couldn't get them all. And they got a few of them as well. But we got how many? More than 1,000, right?
Allegedly 1,400, but I would not be surprised if, the story changes and there were more, right?
Yeah.
But that goes back to our discussion earlier about being in pole position. I mean, that's why we grabbed those Nazis. We were like, if we don't get them, the Russians will.
I get it. And, and I'm sure the Nazis could say, I didn't want to do it. They made me. I'm a nice person. I love Jews.
Well, that was part of the mythology. It was like, we got the good Germans. Well, no, we didn't.
Right.
We got the top Germans, and who do you think the top Germans were?
Yeah.
They were coveted by Hitler, Himmler, Göring,
Yeah.
I mean, these guys were right. I mean, there were guys that we grabbed out of the docks at Nuremberg literally to come be part of our program,
Well,
One of these
if you're smart, you're an asset, right? I mean, that's what Genghis Khan used to do. He'd take warlords from the other side and capture them and go, listen, just come over here, bro. Come on. Work for me. I'm the man.
I mean, ideology aside, I'm super smart and I want that to be known. That's kind of that's the competitor, right? I mean, you cannot be the best rocket designer in the world and not want those talents, demonstrated. That's Werner von Braun's story. That's the story of all of them. And that was so shocking writing that book, because it's like, wow, huge amounts of talent, but how far will the competitor go to see their baby come to fruition? What are they willing to put aside?
Yeah. Did you pay any attention to the other places where Nazis went when they escaped Germany, like Argentina in particular? Have you ever seen any of that stuff? Where they have entire German towns down in Argentina.
Gosh, right?
They do Oktoberfest down there. They wear lederhosen. They drink out of steins. It's crazy. They speak German. And you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, my friend Tim Kennedy went down there, and he said he was literally talking to people, interviewing people, and they had photos of SS soldiers on their wall, and they would talk about how grandfather was a hero, and they're like, like, you're the descendants of escaped Nazis, and they put together a town down there.
I mean, the way the Nazis were able to flee is I can't read enough of that. I mean, that's what Jamie and I were talking about. It's like,
dark.
Oh my God. And it's endless. I mean, there's so, the ones that there was a famous guy that we got. He was the Surgeon General of the Third Reich. I mean, think about that, okay? Dr. Walter Schreiber. I mean, he was such a bad dude. He was in charge of the vaccine program. I mean, you just put those words together and your mind goes really dark, right? But we wanted him because he was an expert in vaccines. And we brought him to the United States. He was the only Nazi I found of the ones, the paperclip scientists who came here, that was actually outed, right? He was outed as a Nazi. And that's because one of the investigators at the Nuremberg trials recognized him.
Oh, Jesus.
And he's the only one we got out of here. And guess where he went? Argentina. And lived out the rest of his life there.
The show was called Finding Hitler. They were trying to find evidence that Hitler somehow escaped. It was really a bullshit premise of the show. But what was interesting is that there were thousands and thousands of Nazis that made it to Argentina and set up shop. It's throughout South America. There's a lot of Germans down there. It's kind of weird.
If you can imagine me on book tour of like the kind of questions I get, because we're talking, right? Having written books about Area 51, Nazis, right?
Jesus.
Assassins.
How are you still alive?
People. I mean, just last night I was at a book giving a signing, and people are like, "Is Hitler really dead?" You know?
Oh, God.
I mean, that right?
What if he was alive? He'd be the oldest man alive.
Right?
Can you imagine? We had dinner together in London, and you were speaking about research that's being done on dimethyltryptamine.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, that's happening at Imperial College, and I recently attended an event just a few weeks ago with several of the volunteers in that project. And what's happening is they are legally being given DMT at Imperial College, which is one of the leading research institutes in the UK. And for the first time ever, they're not looking to find out what are the possible therapeutic outcomes of this. They're actually looking at the experience itself. It's very well known, anybody who's used DMT, I've used DMT multiple times, is going to have entity encounters. They're going to meet entities who may sometimes look very weird. They may be part animal, part human in form. They may be almost formless, but yet they speak to you, they communicate with you. And of course, the mainstream attitude, this is just rubbish, this is just your brain on drugs. Well, Imperial College, they're now testing that view. And what they're finding is that and something else, DMT, as I'm sure you know, Joe, is a very short-acting experience when you smoke it. It's about 12 minutes, maybe less. You're in there, you're plunged into a completely convincing, sometimes terrifying parallel reality. It's so confusing, you hardly know what's going on, and then you're out again. But you come out with a feeling that something's been downloaded to you. In Imperial College, they found a way to keep people in the peak state of DMT for an hour. They're delivering it through drip, through timed release, and they're keeping the volunteers in an hour in that state. So they have time to find their way around the DMT realm that they find themselves in. And the astonishing thing is that these volunteers, both men and women, are all coming back with accounts of meeting the same entities and the same world. And it has to raise the question, and I know Rick Strassman has been on your show, and kudos to Rick Strassman, because he was really the first scientist to work with DMT and human volunteers at the University of New Mexico. Rick Strassman is open to the idea that what happens with DMT is that it alters the receiver wavelength of the brain, and that it allows us to gain access to other realities, that these encounters are not unreal, that they're real, but they're real on a level that we can't experience in a day-to-day state of consciousness. We have to be in an altered state of consciousness in order to experience them. And ultimately, the aim of this project is to map the DMT realm. You know, we talk a lot about extraterrestrials and ETs and making contact, and I'm sure the universe is filled with life, and it would be a very good thing to have the tech to make contact, or perhaps not a good thing, with all those other life forms in the universe. But right there in the DMT experience, inside our own heads, we have the opportunity to encounter another world, another realm, entities who are very different from ourselves and who have teachings to give us. And I think we should be spending a lot more research funds on exploring those experiences and finding out what's going on, rather than zooming off to other planets. Let's do both, but let's make sure that we understand that consciousness is an enormous mystery, and at the level of consciousness, DMT opens up literally a parallel world. And there's a nexus here with quantum physics, and with the notion of parallel realms and parallel realities. Maybe we can actually access them. Well, the work at Imperial College ultimately is going to come up with some answers on that.
Nice to meet you, Ryan.
Nice to meet you, Joe. Pleasure to be here.
You're one of 4 or 5 people that I've talked to that have seen something that might be from somewhere else. It's always weird when you talk to someone that may have seen something that... let's just, first, before we even get started, please tell people your credentials, what your background is.
Sure. So, my name is Ryan Graves. I have an engineering degree, mechanical and aerospace engineering. I promptly left doing that to go fly F-18s for the Navy as soon as I graduated college. Did that for about a decade, both operationally in combat as well as in an instructor role, teaching the new students. And, we did witness something while we were flying in our jets, but, we were doing it we witnessed it in the context of our just everyday flying and our missions.
And what year was it that you witnessed this?
So we started seeing these in 2014 was the earliest that I know. 2013, late 2013, early 2014.
And could you describe what was the very first experience?
Yeah, so for me personally, the experience was simply just flying out to the area like I would any other day. And instead of seeing an empty airspace with just my wing person or another squadron doing something in a different block, there were all of a sudden a lot of different radar contacts, which is immediately a problem because, we could be hitting one of those or someone working in our area. And this was happening because we upgraded our radar the best we could tell. We were in a earlier radar called the APG-73, and we had come back from deployment. We entered a maintenance phase, it's called. We kind of do a little bit less flying, upgrade the jets if we need to, do any long-lasting maintenance, and we upgraded to the APG-79, which was a much better radar.
And what is the difference in the capabilities of the upgraded radar system versus the original system?
Mm-hmm. So, kind of practically speaking, it's like going from an analog TV essentially to like an OLED. It's, a digital modern tool compared to more of like an analog classical radar that has more limited range and has less ability to track multiple targets and things of that nature. So just generally speaking, we would expect to see, more objects if there were any out there or smaller objects, but there shouldn't have been any objects out there.
And so how far offshore are you when this is all going down?
Our working areas start about 10 miles off the coast, and then it goes out 100 or 250 miles or so, though we don't usually use those far eastern areas. But we would only see them over the water. So they would really only be in our working areas, maybe slightly, in between the working area and land, but never over the land. Sometimes over the bays that are in the area that are quite large. But never just kind of zooming west over land or anything like that. We would see them being flat, too. We'd see them perfectly stationary up there, regardless of the wind.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. So what kind of wind are you talking about?
Oh, gosh. I mean, at altitude, you can have anywhere up to 100, 120 knots of airspeed.
What is that in miles per hour?
It's about 100, 130, 140 miles an hour.
So they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind?
Correct.
How would something do that?
It's confusing to me as well. Even if we had something that could just burn that much energy, right? Like if you had a sphere surrounded by little rockets, right? Just imagining something right now.
Okay.
And if you wanted to keep that perfectly stationary, right, against gravity, you could just fire all the rockets at the bottom really fast and hopefully keep it flat, right?
Right.
It's going to have tiny little variations. And then if you have wind hitting it and all this, you could potentially have those rockets try to counter it, but it would never be perfectly still in winds like that.
Because the wind's not perfectly still either, right?
Exactly.
It changes and varies.
It does. So it's almost like it's the wind. It's not even really fighting the wind, it seems. It just seems like it's just there in a way.
Wow.
There were two aircraft from my squadron, VFA 11, and they flew, took off as a flight of two. That means they're essentially flying in a formation like this. And as they hit the area, one of these objects went right between the aircraft. The lead air crew saw the object. The Dash 2 aircraft crew did not, which is not surprising because they're usually, you're very focused on flying formation. You're just staring right at that aircraft. The lead really has actual leeway to look around. So he saw it, and, he immediately came back. I have to assume he didn't have it on his radar because he wouldn't have flown through this object at the entrance point. He turned around, flew back, landed, and I was in the ready room when he come back, and he had all his gear on, which typically is not a good thing because you want to get that stuff off as fast as possible. So usually means there's a problem of some nature, and he was just sitting there saying, "Hey, I almost hit one of those damn things," and we all knew what he was referring to, even though we didn't necessarily have a name for it, just because we were seeing these so much. And he described it. He described it just as a black or dark gray cube, and that cube was inside of a clear translucent sphere. And essentially, the apex or the corners of that cube, best he could tell, were touching that inside of that sphere.
And that description mirrors many of the descriptions that people have had of these, whatever you want to call them. Whether they're calling them UAPs now for some strange reason. UFOs is I don't know, does it have a dirty connotation to it? And is it tainted because of so many crazy people talk about UFOs? Is that what it is?